Welcome to Round Hill Radio, the podcast from Round Hill Community Church. Through our conversations, we discover the holy and the ordinary, find moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we're talking about when we talk about faith. Welcome to Round Hill Radio. I'm Leslie.
I'm Ed.
Good morning, Ed.
Good morning, Leslie.
This is our last podcast of 2020.
Wow.
We've made it.
The podcasts have been great. Let's hope for a better and brighter new year.
Yes, I very much so.
Much better.
I was thinking back to this whole year a little bit and thinking back to the video series. I was going through our YouTube channel. The video series. Do you remember that it was 2020, this exact same year that we did a video every day in Lent?
Oh, we did. I do remember.
Does that not feel like 3 years ago?
It feels like a very long time ago. Wow, that was on the edges of my memory.
Yeah, I was looking through the videos and I found this whole list of Lent. I was like, oh,
my goodness.
I remember those. Those were really fun. But that feels like forever ago.
And we were doing that just in the early months of the pandemic. And oh my goodness gracious.
Yeah, finished up right then. Another little callback I wanted to bring up, because I spent last afternoon and evening doing most of the edit for our Christmas Eve service, our virtual online Christmas Eve service. And I was editing O Come All Ye Faithful that we were talking about last week here on the podcast.
Yes.
If you haven't watched that episode, please go do it now. And I got literal chills listening to it. With David Wilcox harmonization and Scott and Risa singing their hearts out. And I just, I'm so excited for you guys to hear it once it comes out on Christmas Eve. It's going to,
I was so inspired by it so I've included two brief reflections in that Christmas Eve message. And one of them is really around, O Come All Ye Faithful.
I realized that about halfway through the edit, and then I had to rearrange everything because you led so beautifully into that hymn that I thought, well, I have to put that right before we sing "O Come All Ye Faithful."
Oh, perfect.
So that's what we did. We had a little
improvisation,
a little game of cups.
Oh, that's great.
So it's fun. Today's hymn, our final hymn in our Christmas Carol series, which I think I've been having so much fun doing.
It's been great.
Is O Little Town of Bethlehem, which is such an interesting story of pastor and musician collaboration.
Yes.
Funny story that our own Dan Haug, the Reverend Dan Haug, last week sent me the story of this hymn, because as he was leading our meditation group via Zoom, which meets on Thursdays, they've been doing their meditation group based on Christmas carols. Wonderful. And he was looking up the story and he sent it to me saying, "This is an amazing story. You guys should talk about this on the podcast." Well,
synergy.
Perfect. We already plan on doing so. So I have his printout. I have our wonderful book.
Oh, good.
So the quick sort of, it's Cliff Notes, I think people say anymore. My generation calls them Cliff Notes. So the quick summary of A Little Town Bethlehem is that the text was written by a pastor in Boston. And in classic style, he says, "Oh, I have a text. Here, director of music. Write something for it."
I love it. Yeah. 48 hours. Do it.
Yeah. Basically. And so there's wonderful text about the musician just panicking. I mean, if there is not a more classic illustration of the pastor-musician relationship, I don't know what is. In his own words, this is the Lewis... is it Redner Lewis or Lewis Redner? Forgive me.
I think Lewis Redner.
Lewis Redner. He says, "The simple music was written in great haste and under great pressure. We were to practice it on the following Sunday. Mr. Brooks came to me on Friday and said, 'Redner, have you ground out that music yet to A Little Town of Bethlehem?' I replied, 'No, but he should have it by Sunday.' On the Saturday night previous, my brain was all confused about the tune. I thought about my Sunday school lesson more than I did about the music. But I was roused from sleep late in the night, hearing an angel strain whispering in my ear.
Oh, perfect.
Taking a piece of music paper, I jotted down the treble tune as we have it now. And on Sunday morning before going to church, I filled in the harmony.
Of course he did.
Of course he did. Of course he did. This cracks me up. Neither Mr. Brooks nor I ever thought the carol or the music to it would live beyond that Christmas of 1868.
Wow. Isn't that a great story?
You know, I'm glad that the dynamic lives on.
Yeah, some things haven't changed.
Some things haven't changed.
Leslie, by the way, I've written up a little something for Christmas Eve.
Oh, great.
I'll get it to you by Wednesday. Oh my gosh, can you imagine? Well, and Phillips Brooks was such an imposing figure. I mean, he was the pastor of Trinity Episcopal Church in Boston, which his statue is outside that congregation. He was such a prominent citizen, as well as a great leader. And he'd had this trip to the Holy Land in 1865. So he really had, it's funny because he came back in 1865. I'm not sure exactly when the text was written, but it sounds like he sat on it for a while and then launched it on poor Louis Redner, just at the last possible minute. Like 3 years later, he could have given it to him before that. But
right. He was just taking his time, enjoying, working through the text at a scholarly rate, ruminating. And then, here.
Yeah.
You can whip something up, right?
Well, it sure worked. I mean, it's amazing that I think for so many people, this probably is one of the sweeter carols. It's just, it has this lovely softness to it. And as I understand the background, Phillips Brooks was on this trip to the Holy Land and was riding on horseback with a group of other people, and they arrived at Bethlehem. And apparently there was a church service that evening in the village held within a basilica that had been constructed during the time of Constantine, the emperor of Rome. So he was emperor during the early part of the 4th century, when Christianity moved from kind of an outlier religion to sort of to basically the state-sponsored religion of the Roman Empire. So he had constructed this basilica, which was still in use. And I guess Phillips Brooks went to the Christmas Eve service there and noted later that it started at 10 p.m. and concluded at 3 a.m. So I'm thinking he might have composed that carol while he was sitting there during that 5-hour service.
He had the time.
He had some time. Heavens, my goodness.
I love that. Well, he's described in our favorite book we've been using, Then Sings My Soul. The first line of this, the first line of this actually reminds me of the beginning of the Christmas Carol. Was it Marley was dead to begin with?
Yes.
You can't beat that. But this tries at nearly 6'6", weighing 300 pounds, Phillips Brooks cast a long shadow.
Oh, gee, perfect.
You're going to keep reading.
An imposing figure, right?
Imposing figure. Can you imagine that guy lumbering his way to Jerusalem?
Oh, my heavens. On horseback? I mean.
Oh, poor horse.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. Well, he was really regarded as one of the great preachers of the 19th century. There weren't many who were held in the same esteem that he was. And I don't know if he ever wrote any other hymns or carols, but his published sermons were really widely distributed. And, Leslie, I was thinking about as I was rereading this carol in anticipation of today, I have to say that, first of all, little fun fact for me, which is simply that this carol contains my favorite line in all of the Christmas carols. And in fact, it's the only line, I think, that I quote from time to time in other months of the year. So it's one carol that for me is good for 12 months of the year. And it's this very last very last stanza, where he says, O holy child of Bethlehem, descend to us, we pray, cast out our sin and enter in, be born in us today. We hear the Christmas angels, the great glad tidings tell, O come to us, abide with us, our God, Emmanuel. And the thing about this hymn that strikes me is that it's actually that line picks up a thought that he has mentioned earlier. He says, where meek souls will receive him still, the dear Christ enters in. So when Christ enters in, those habits and thoughts and attitudes in us that are not loving or just, they have to make their way out. Mm-hmm. And I really love that, that it's really about creating a space for love in our lives. And I think this is really the whole story of Jesus, right? He's consistently working in people's lives to create that spirit. So I really love that thought. I also am wondering what the influence of the Civil War was on Philip's books, if at all, while he was thinking of this, because I believe that he was traveling in December of 1865. So the war had ended in April, and of course, President Lincoln had been assassinated. Reconstruction was, in such a difficult period for the nation. And here he makes this trip to the Holy Land, interestingly enough, right after the Civil War, and then writes this. And I just think about him, again, challenging everyone to sort of cast out those things about us which are not loving and compassionate and just, and replacing them with things that are, which is certainly something that the whole nation had to do.
Absolutely. And that's reflected in actually the original fourth verse. You just read the original fifth, but there's one that's left out, which goes, where children pure and happy pray to the blessed child, where misery cries out to thee, son of the mother mild, where charity stands watching and faith holds wide the door, the dark night wakes, the glory breaks, and Christmas comes once more.
Isn't that beautiful?
That triumphant?
Yeah, it's
quote,
beautiful.
Come, O ye faithful. It's a wonderful end to a verse. I love that. The dark night wakes, the glory breaks, and Christmas comes once more.
Yeah. Isn't that great? Yeah, I get chills listening to that. It's such a great image. And he loves that image of darkness. He talks about that in the dark street shineth the everlasting light. And but the hymn does admit there are things about our world that aren't totally illuminated or illuminating. And so there's something magical that continues to happen. And it's one of the things that's been interesting about this, Leslie, is to see how many verses or stanzas haven't been included over the years in these different Christmas carols. Like at some point, someone said, I don't like that anymore. It's gone.
Right. Well, and you were saying that in England, this isn't sung to this tune at all.
Yes. Yeah. It's the tune is Forest Green, and it's a jaunty, tune. I mean, it's really bright.
Right.
And I don't know. I've sung it there when I lived in the United Kingdom for 3 years. And so every Christmas I used to sing that tune to this particular carol. And it was lovely. But the thing about O Little Town of Bethlehem sung to the tune we're familiar with is that there is this very quiet, meditative softness to it. And honestly, Christmas can be so out of control, just like charging ahead in all of its unbridled commercialism. I really like this. I don't know how you feel about that. How does this tune strike you?
Oh, absolutely. I find myself every Christmas really drawn to the contemplative, quiet moments. I always love, for me, I want Christmas Eve. If it was only for me, it would just be one long candlelight moment. Like I just draw that out. Give me all the lullabies, give me all the, there's, to me, this tune, there's almost something mystical about it. The way that he weaves his way. We have these chromaticisms that, right in that first full measure where we started in A, which is the third scale degree. We're in F major here. And then we go to a G sharp. And that's not a normal place necessarily to go, right at the beginning of a tune, for sure. A lot of the times hymns begin on tonic. They begin on our home note. So in this case, it would have been F. But, we have a lot of these moments. And if you look at the accompaniment the harmonization he filled in, there's a lot of really chromatic things happening that make it seem like he was trying to evoke this feeling of something being it's not a hearty hymn, it's not
Right.
it's not something that just sort of sits and is in its major key. We think of, pretty much everyone, I'm flipping through the hymnal now, Joy to the World is completely diatonic, Away in a Manger, pretty much a lot of them, right,
Yeah.
follow a certain structure. And this one just has a really exciting thing happening. We have some A major moments. We could get really technical about it. I won't. But it's very evocative. I think it conjures up this sort of this smoky image for me when I hear this tune. And I think about if I had to guess what happened when this text went to the UK, I could imagine they thought, well, we love this text. The easiest way to get it to our congregation, because the meter fits, we'll sing it to Forest Green because it fits Forest Green.
Yep.
And that's a nice way for congregations who might not be so open to new hymns.
Sure. It's a familiar tunes
to them. So they would have sung it to that.
Sure.
But it definitely doesn't, da dee 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 dee, how still we see thee lie. Right. It doesn't quite have the same.
It doesn't feel that still, right?
It does not feel that still. It is not definitely not still.
Well, one of the things I think you're really putting the finger on, I guess I would use the word contemplative to, describe the mood of this particular carol. And I think that the thing that I love that Phillips Brooks has captured is that here's this town, it's sleepy, it's rural, there's nothing going on in this place. That's the background, right. Except there is something going on in this place. And it's so quiet and hidden and removed from the, the mainstream of, in this case, of Roman culture 2,000 years ago. Who would have noticed? Mm-hmm. In a sense, God is sneaking in through the back door. And this tells us a lot about God as well as about Jesus. He's raising a lot of very interesting theological questions. And this is a little aside, but one of the things that I've been reading over the past couple of weeks is a book about something that happened during another terrible time of pandemic. This was in the 14th century. There were always plagues in a sense. Early Roman Empire, right up into the Middle Ages. And there was a plague in the 14th century that afflicted Europe and England. And it was a terrible time. And yet in the middle of it, some of the greatest books on contemplative prayer that have ever been written were created in the middle of that. I guess you could call it a pandemic. Mm-hmm. And so again, at a time when it didn't look like much was happening that was good and hopeful and illuminating, it was. And those authors and those books that were prominent then are still prominent now. People are still turning to them. And here, this is what Brooks does. He reaches back into that story and he says, oh, it didn't look like much was happening there, but here it was. I just really love that thought.
I think that's really interesting. And a way that Lewis illuminates the text, I find really interesting too, because I think he identified in the text something really interesting, which is that the last little phrase of each stanza is a really important moment. So he precedes that with an octave leap, which if you're not a musician can be tricky to sing. It's a long jump to go, in this case, from a middle D to a treble D. And it really is highlighting. You're going to take a breath there. There's a comma there. So everybody naturally breathes. And so it sets aside this little phrase, as a special moment. In organ playing, we can't hit the key harder to play louder. Right. Every key is the same, if our registration is the same, the volume is the same. So one way that we illuminate and make a note seem louder is by giving a space before it. Oh, so we call it it's a little sort of a Gothic accent kind of moment. And so you give the silence, because nothing is louder than something that follows silence.
Sure. Right.
So he gives us this little lift moment and then the final like kernel of wisdom from our hymn tune.
Oh, that's lovely. I'm glad you shared that. That helps me to actually hear this differently and appreciate what he was trying to do musically.
I do feel like I have this thing in the middle of my mind that I feel like there's the comma after still. I want to say I sometimes feel like I see it before. So I've been sitting here the whole time going, where's that comma? Or if I had an organist friend, where meek souls will receive him, still the dear Christ enters in. I want to say I had an organist friend that maybe would always put it early or something. I'll have to report back, friends. I'll do some digging. It's a funny thing.
Yeah, it's I think the other beautiful thing about this Christmas carol is it's as if this very quiet dance is going on between whatever God is doing and whoever we are, and I guess that's why I really like that phrase, where meek souls will receive him still, the dear Christ enters in, it's a partnership.
Absolutely.
And it's very promising, I think, especially at this time. I've been thinking in the last couple of weeks as news about the vaccine distribution. Well, its creation, first of all, of course, which is nothing less than stupendous, followed by its distribution is definitely bringing hope. I mean, I can feel that it's for some people, it's changing their mood. It's giving them a different sense of the future. And then I was thinking, as wonderful as it is and essential for the future, there are so many things about our world that a vaccine can't correct. And we learned this during the last year. The deeper inequities that we have in our world, especially in this country, these things are not going to be healed by a vaccine. The vaccine will put us in a position to do something about them. Mm-hmm. And so I think that for me, I look at this hymn and think this is sort of the spiritual side of the vaccination. There's the vaccination that will help us to move beyond our fear of COVID-19, but there's another kind of infusion that we need. And to me, for Phillips Brooks, I think this is the infusion of this grace that he sees kind of just coming into the world very quietly and very silently. I think there's hope there too. It's not like we have to do the big thing. The dear Christ enters into a meek soul's life. It doesn't have to be, ta-da. So I take hope in that.
I love that. And I think that I couldn't add any more to that. So with that, I will thank you all for joining us on this hymn journey this December. I have a feeling that we'll do probably some more musical based podcasts going forward, because this was so much fun.
I've learned a lot from you, Leslie. It's been a very rich experience.
Well, likewise too, because I've played these hymns every year for a solid 20 years. And after a while, you stop paying attention.
Yeah.
And it feels really nice to just take a pause and really look at it. And I think I'll play them differently from now on. So that makes it really fun. So thank you for that.
Well, blessings and blessings to all of our audience for this Christmas season. And here is indeed to a healthier, holier, happier new year.
Amen. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thanks for listening. Round Hill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Round Hill Community Church. For more information, please visit roundhillcommunitychurch.org.